Vinyl community, it's Vinyl Ventures, and we have a banger of a show coming at you today. We caught up with a music industry guy who has done quite a bit of work. I'm going to hold off on naming the mystery guest, and my partner gets to name the guest.
Well, he has worked for MTV, SiriusXM. He's a content creator and a digital media producer. It's Roger Coletti. And we've got to tell you, he was gracious with his time to spend as much as he did with us. So let's take a look at our talk with Roger. Roger, thanks for joining us. It's Vinyl Ventures. So it's appropriate to start out with a vinyl question. What has the vinyl resurrection kind of been like from your perspective?
It's been really cool because I didn't realize how much I missed the physicality of vinyl. When CDs came in, it was this new technology, it was the future, and everything was getting smaller, and you were trying to just be ahead of the curve with technology. So vinyl just really got pushed to the side quickly. But then, as you started, playing with CDs and listening to them and all that, and as I started getting older, I missed that. I missed everything that came along with vinyl. And you realized how much vinyl really was an experience, not just, a format, and, being a fan of bands like Kiss, who really took advantage of the vinyl, packaging, whether it was getting a poster, getting tattoos, getting, the thing to film.
A love gun,
yeah. And not only that, but also I was a big fan of knowing everything about a record when I got one. So the more liner notes there were, if there were lyrics, that was huge. Because so many times as a kid, I'd be like, I thought I knew the lyrics to a song. And then you bought the vinyl and there are the lyrics. And I'm like, I would totally been singing this wrong for years. Yeah. Which was something, when I was working on Volume on SiriusXM, that we would ask the audience about a lot. And it was funny how many people to this day still did not know the correct lyrics to certain huge songs. So, that plus, vinyl, I think everyone needs something to collect in their lives. And I love, collecting vinyl. Not so much, I haven't gotten into the whole, I need a first pressing of this or that, but just going back and rebuying albums that I had in my youth that may have gotten lost in the shuffle, or just, when you're a kid and you have vinyl, I don't think I ever understood that vinyl was not indestructible. So you would just, you had a crappy stereo, you'd throw needles down on this stuff. Eventually these albums would get scratched up and wouldn't sound the same. So, now with the advances in how they press vinyl, getting newer copies of this stuff and hearing how great it sounds is really fantastic. And I love, how a lot of artists are repackaging anniversary issues and giving you, outtakes or different mixes and different liner notes and stuff like that. So that's been fun. And there's nothing, cooler than just wasting time in a record store, just looking through bins, seeing what you could find, being remembered. It's almost like a memory trigger. Like I'll be flipping through a bin and like, oh my God, I totally forgot about this band Helix or whatever. And it's like, oh my God, I need to get that album again, or I need to at least go listen to that song again. So it's been really cool.
It's what Wheels and I, as we've moved along in this, it's time travel.
Mm-hmm.
It's a time capsule. And we just worked together in Minneapolis a couple weeks ago and went to a couple of local record stores, and man, we probably spent 3 or 4 hours in each.
Yeah, it was just great seeing what different cities kind of have in stock, because if you go to different areas, you're going to find a totally different bunch of records.
It's amazing.
That's, a great thing about the local record store is, if they're really connected to the community, they know what works there. They, and they really cater. that's what makes record stores unique. They're not all carrying the same 500 records. Depending on where you
Right.
are, you're going to find different things. You know, one of my favorite record stores in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania is called Main Street Records. And it's just this really cool record store. And you could tell the type of music the owners like just by how the store's set up and what's showcased and things like that, you know, and that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it kind of carries with it a lot more personality,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like. And it's for all those reasons that you mentioned. I mean, I don't think that the younger folks that are just getting into vinyl inherently have that same relationship with it that we did,
Right.
but they're starting to. I mean, we saw more kids at this record show yesterday than I've seen since I've been going for like 9-10 years. And but the time travel thing, you not only do you get lost in the timeline of your life,
Mm-hmm.
but you can also get lost just doing that muscle memory of flipping through records, and you look at your watch and it's 4 hours later.
Yep.
And you have somewhere to be. So
Yep. And that's why I love any movie or TV show that can capture that experience,
Yes.
whether it was, you know, Empire Records or
High Fidelity.
And both the movie and the series. I thought the series was great too.
I never
With
caught
Tony
the
Pratt.
series, but
It was really good. Very
Yeah.
similar. Like they really kept it kind of close to what
Yeah.
the book was. And, you know, that book and that movie also a big influence on what volume was, you know. And I got to tell Nick
Yeah.
Hornby that one day and tell him, and he was like, and he was on volume talking about it. It was great.
that's so cool. So Roger, for the folks that aren't familiar with you and don't feel like they're your buddy, can you tell us a little about how you got into the music industry? And if that's starting back in high school to college and then onward, that's great. But I think the story is really great.
Well, I always wanted to be in the music business somehow because I started playing drums at a very young age. So I wanted to be in a band. I wanted to be famous. I wanted to play Madison Square Garden. And I figured the best way to do that as I started getting older was, well, you got to work in the music business somewhere. You know, aside from just trying to get your band signed, you needed a job somewhere. And I have a brother who's 5 years older than me, and he was working at WNEW-FM in New York, which was like the big classic rock radio station back in the day. And when I became of age, I got an internship there. And I'd answer phones and take requests and run the board. And, you know, working at a radio station, growing up as a kid, you know, calling in and requesting songs, this was huge, you know, and working with Dan Neer, who's the DJ at the time, and guys like Marty Martinez and Harris Allen and Ian O'Malley, all these great DJs was fantastic. And that kind of opened the door to other areas of the business. And I started working at another company that was a radio syndication company. And basically what they did was they created radio shows on reel-to-reel or on vinyl for stations around the country. And one of those shows was a show called Metal Shop that I eventually became one of the editors on. And it was a great experience. Producer Don Kay was this really cool guy who was really connected with all the bands, all the metal bands at the time. But this was all kind of happening at the time where grunge was really starting to come up. The hair metal thing was starting to go the other way. And it was this big transition time. So a lot of shows like that were kind of on their way out because they weren't reflective, you know, of kind of where music was going at the time. And, you know, hair metal and that kind of stuff started to, you know, not have the same, you know, quality that it did. And people looked at it differently. And it was kind of like, oh, if you like that, you're not cool anymore, you know, and the Seattle scene kind of took over.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing that we've talked about on the show is you listen back to that music now, the Seattle scene, and it's just rock and roll.
Yep.
But at the time, there was such a dividing line built by the music industry to separate the two. And now, you know, those bands from the 80s are beginning to win favor back from a lot of the audience that they lost when that stuff happened.
Well, I mean, look, Motley Crue is playing stadiums right now. Def Leppard is playing stadiums right now. Poison was playing stadiums with them. A lot of these bands have weathered the storm, come back, and are doing decent business. They're, whether they're on package tours or on these metal cruises or whatever, but they're out there playing, and there's an audience that wants to hear them and wants to hear that music. So that's really cool. And it's nice to see that, because there's some great music that came out of that on both sides. But you could say the same thing about a lot of the metal too, or hair metal, whatever you want to call it. A lot of it was just rock and roll, and it was just a different style. The grunge stuff was a little more gritty. It was a little more raw,
A little more like garage rock, yeah.
Yeah. Introspective.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times sounded more like, the way 60s bands kind of approach things.
Yeah.
So it's when you put it all together, it's all good stuff. I don't, there's not like, oh, I didn't like this, I don't like that kind of thing with me. And that was part of what I wanted to do in my career too, was work on all types of music. So when I got to MTV in '94 to help them launch a radio network, and then eventually VH1 and CMT, it was real interesting because, MTV played everything. You had your MTV Raps, you had, they had all these different, they had Headbangers Ball, you had 120 Minutes, you had all these different shows that catered to all these different types of music. And, one of my early jobs there was, I was kind of like a music journalist. We interviewed all of these bands and then cut it up for radio stations and sent it around and wrote articles about them and things like that for MTV News and .com and stuff like that as well. So you got exposed to all of this type of music. But being at MTV, you also got exposed to it in that MTV world. You were, interviewing these bands at spring break or at the VMAs or at the movie awards. And it was at that height of MTV where it was just bigger than big. The VMAs were the biggest, award show of the year, by a mile. And to be a part of that and to see how those shows are being put together and to be, at Woodstock 99 and covering it with MTV and watching that chaos unfold, all of those things were it was just an amazing experience. And getting to take brands like Behind the Music and turn it into a radio franchise, or the MTV concerts and turn them into a concert series was really interesting to work on. So, while we were this radio arm of MTV, we got to intersect with all of the different departments and all of the VJs and all of the producers and hosts. And it was a great experience. It was frightening at first, when I first got there and you're writing news copy that Kurt Loder is going to read for radio when you've been watching this guy on TV, was a little nerve-wracking, but it was great. It was a really great experience. What
were the years you were there at MTV?
I was there from '94 to 2016.
Oh, wow. That's a good
21
run.
years, I think, total. Yeah, it was so I saw a lot of the shifts in programming, in the popularity of the channels. So it was, at times it was great, at times it was tough.
As a huge music fan, that had to be a really interesting time to be somewhere like MTV, because MTV, it didn't take a 180-degree turn. It kind of took a really long curve, kind of away from that music centrality.
Yeah, and I don't think, as someone who, I wasn't in the programming part of the, like I said, we were this outlet to radio stations around the country through MTV. Like, we were taking all of the content and trying to get it to radio stations. So all these shifts in programming were happening in real time around you, but a lot of us were just so involved in what we were doing at the time, whatever it was, that you didn't necessarily notice the shift, until it was kind of there. And then like, whoa, this is all of a sudden like, it's the Osbournes, it's Real World. It's like, we're not playing videos that much anymore. And this is really cool. And then there's Beavis and Butthead and all that. So it was interesting to see, but yeah. And you always, once you started playing, everyone was like, why doesn't MTV play videos of it? And why doesn't, like, you just got asked that constantly. And the answer was always kind of the same, was, well, people don't want to watch videos anymore for whatever reason, I'm sure.
Yeah, they're switching the channel.
Yeah, I'm sure if the ratings were still hot on videos, they'd be playing them right now,
How can you get eyes on this advertising? that's happening. I mean,
Right.
it's not rocket surgery.
No, and I think it was at MTV where I really started towards the end, where I really started thinking about how crazy it was that all we would do, the reason I think all of us worked together in the departments I worked at, or people is the love of music was just so far past work, where you would go out at night and you would hang out with people and you'd still be talking about this band or this lead singer or this record or this tour or concert. And that's all we did. And I really started to think about that mentality of there's not a home for people to talk about music this way. The way people who are obsessed with sports talk about sports, and they have bazillions of sports talk shows to call into and argue about, and all of these, DJs that are experts on it. And I just kept thinking there should be something like that for music. If I'm this obsessed, there's got to be more people like me. And I knew all my friends were, my brother, and and people like that. So when I got the chance to start putting volume together and present it to Sirius, it was really cool to be able to build something like that and then see the reaction of an audience do exactly what you hope they would do, which is call in and really get angry about things or get passionate about things. And it could have been the silliest topic or the most serious, but they took them with the same weight sometimes. And that was really cool, that people were just as passionate about things that were goofy as they were about things that were serious, whether it was which lead singer is better, is it David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar, or when you were talking about, real important music issues that were affecting, things at the time, especially while volume was on, whether it was, watching a lot of these venues close down and there were less and less music venues for new bands to go play at, and how people would call in and talk about that, and how venue owners would call in and talk about it. So it was this really great space where all of that could kind of happen. And that was really cool. I
mean, the Facebook groups that were created, the Volumaniacs out there.
Volumaniacs are amazing.
Yeah, it's unbelievable how quickly I got sucked into it. I mean, I think subconsciously I was clamoring for that same kind of thing that you were with a rock talk radio.
Yep.
And I didn't know it, but when it came on, it just instantly clicked with me. So, and I had that same thought, like, well, there have to be millions of people that are digging into this, and that's great.
The Volumaniacs, when they started their whole Facebook page, we had a deal, all the hosts, that we would not join the Volumaniacs because we wanted them to have a place where they could talk about us and not feel like we were monitoring it. But as soon as I left SiriusXM, I joined, and I was like, oh, so this is what it's like in here. I'm like, all right, fire away. Let me hear all the shit now.
I mean, what a cool experience. I still listen, but it just isn't the same. There's some shows that, as a music fan, listening to, satellite radio, music based, that I just kind of wonder why. But, I'm not a program director.
And also, from having worked with Eddie Trunk prior and having known Eddie Trunk, I just knew, and he was already at Sirius doing a show like Monday nights, talking a little but playing mostly music, and I was like, no, someone's got to just let this guy open the mic and let him loose. And he was like one of the first things I put in my head of, oh, he's going to be like one of the centerpieces of this, because this is what he does. And I knew that if you gave Eddie, enough space, it would be crazy. And he's still doing it today, and he will do it the rest of his life. That is what he loves to do. He is one of the most passionate people you will ever hear talk about music. Whether you agree with him or not, he stands his ground. He doesn't care if he pisses an artist off by telling the truth or by telling what he thinks is the truth. He's going to say what he wants to say, and he's going to defend it. And I love that about him.
Yeah, I mean, it's got such staying power. I mean, I remember hearing when the layoffs happened, and my heart sank for a lot of folks because I only have, ancillary knowledge of what happens when something like that comes up. But my heart also sank for myself because I knew that that things at that station were likely to change.
Yeah, and you know what? It was a fantastic run. Yes, I wish it could have gone on longer than it did, but Sirius gave me an amazing opportunity, and I'll always be grateful to have had an area or a venue where I could create what we all created together, and that'll always be special to me. And I have nothing but respect for the people I worked with there, and for the people who helped build that thing. It took a lot of people to make that station what it was, including the audience, but it took an enormous amount of people, from the talent department to marketing to graphics, you name it, the tech, just the physicality of getting a signal to space, getting it back down, getting it in cars, getting it on the web. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of work. Yeah. And of course, all the hosts.
Oh, yeah. All the hosts, I don't think that it's often, whether it's a TV network or a radio network, I don't think that from the start, you basically knock it out of the park with all the on-air people. And you really kind of did. I mean, it.
I'm glad that it resonated that way. There was a lot of stuff behind the scenes, though, that, didn't, what made it a little more difficult. You had to deal with a lot of people, a lot of personalities, but everyone really loved doing what they did and loved talking, and yeah, there would be some arguments and things like that because people were really passionate about this stuff, but it also, what the channel also did was even further reignite my love for vinyl when we started, opening up those conversations and talking to the folks at Record Store Day, and then, just talking to the audience and finding out that there were people who just never got off the vinyl train. And then there were people who were back on it and had this super passion about it again. So that was a lot of fun too, especially when you could just do an entire day or week talking about album covers, the cover art, and that was amazing, so we were able to really get into the vinyl experience in different ways and in bigger conversations on the air, and to be able to do it live is so cool. To get that immediate reaction from someone was great.
So Roger, what was we're going to rewind a little bit. What was your first album you ever got as a kid with your own money?
With my own money, it was Heart's Greatest Hits. I think it cost $9, if I'm not mistaken. I had albums prior, so I think I'd gotten Rock and Roll Over for Christmas one year. I stole my sister's copy of Kiss Alive from her. Nice. So props to my sister Camille for having that record. And my brother and sister, both older than me, had a record collection already. My sister had a lot of disco, which was also amazing. I can't even tell you like how big a fan I am of that genre as well, because of that record collection. And my brother, more, the Queen, Zeppelin, Pretenders, the punk side of things, the Clash and the Ramones and all of that. So I really had a lot at my disposal. And then, of course, there was my mom and dad's record collection, which was a lot of Benny Goodman, big band stuff, and also stuff like Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons or Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs. So that stuff was also huge to me too. So I just grew up loving all types of music. And it was kind of like food. It was like, all right, I'm hungry. Give me more of that. Whatever it is, I don't care. So then when it was time for me to actually go purchase records, that's where your allowance went, And that was tough, man. When you walked into a record store and you could only buy one record, but at the time, there was no way to sample these records. You were a lot of times buying on, I know that band, I've heard them on the radio, and that's a cool album cover.
Yeah, the album cover.
11, that's basically what you have to go on. But to this day, that Heart's Greatest Hits album, which is kind of hard to find, it's a white cover, double album, but it's got a few live tracks on them. It's got them doing Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin. Long Tall Sally, and Unchained Melody. And the version of Unchained Melody on that album is, in my opinion, one of the best live vocal performances you will ever hear in your life, hands down. Ann Wilson does an enormous amount of vocal gymnastics on this thing that is just unmatched.
She is an unsung rock hero. There's no doubt about it. We did a show on our favorite female artists and bands, and they definitely got some airtime there.
That's well deserved too.
Yeah. Oh, and just on the heart subject, I heard driving to the office today that Ann and Nancy are writing together again.
That would be amazing.
Yeah,
that would be
amazing. I mean, I hope there's still more music to come from the two of them together, and I hope there's more live concerts to come from the two of them together. I'd buy that ticket in a second.
Absolutely. That split, whether it's those two or whether it's all those 80s bands that we're talking about, having multiple versions out there, all that does is splinter the audience and confuse people.
Yep.
So I also wanted to rewind a little bit, and your brother's association with Unplugged plays pretty heavily into Kiss and their future, and I just want that to get a mention. Because this isn't an all Kiss show, but that's a pretty important little hunk of history there.
It is. So when I was, before coming to MTV, when I worked at MGI Broadcasting, and even when I started at MTV, Kiss was in that non-makeup phase. And my brother and I were both huge Kiss fans. It was the first concert we ever went to. I was 8. He was, 11, 12. My dad took us. And we were fanatical fans. But by this time, the non-makeup era, my brother, I think, had moved on to other bands at that time. Kiss was not the biggest band in the world anymore. Alex was already producing MTV Unplugged, and, they took notice to this. And we went and saw a couple of conventions, and we actually shot a couple of them when there was talk of them doing Unplugged. And that's when I first started working at MTV, and I was actually hired to be one of the stage managers on that. He was producing the show itself. And it was a great experience to get to work with them and to get to work with the original 4 members, and also Bruce Kulick and Eric Singer at the time. And, and watch that audience go ballistic when the original 4 got back together, 10 years after splitting up. So that was really cool. And I think it was really the start of us having a much deeper relationship with the band. Eventually we would both go on to work on the Kissology franchise and produce and co-produce that, which kept us working with Kiss for like 2.5 years nonstop on that project. And my brother also, produced their performance under the Brooklyn Bridge for the MTV Video Music Awards. So there are all these little times we wound up working for a band we grew up loving. So that was really cool. And to this day, we are in contact, and who knows, maybe we'll be working together with them soon on something.
How crazy is it to have seen that? What was it, the 77 show that was the first show? Okay. So you saw that at MSG. And then fast forward, you're working with the band in your professional life. That's insane.
What did your father think of the show?
It was funny because my dad worked at Magnavox at the time in sales.
Oh yeah.
So we would get electronic equipment to the house sometimes before it was on for sale. Like we had a VHS machine before they were really on the market. The thing was tremendous. Laser discs, all that kind of stuff. So I swear, when we went to see Kiss, it was literally like out of What's Happening. My dad had a Magnavox tape recorder in his belt, and taped he didn't drop it and get caught like Rerun did, but he taped the entire concert on cassette. Now, mind you, we were sitting basically behind the stage. We were up in the rafters, like as far back as you can get, which for me, I thought was kind of cool because I got to watch Peter Criss. So as a drummer, this was a great seat.
Yeah. No seats off limits in 1977 because everybody wanted a ticket.
You were behind a pole. That was it. And I remember when the big Kiss Army flags came down, it's like you had to look around them to see. But we got the cassette home, and all you heard was just me and my brother screaming. You couldn't hear the band at all. But I'll never forget too, like my dad smoked cigarettes. And at that time, I think you can smoke in Madison Square Garden. And some guy in front of us had like one of those, like the things you would have cotton candy in, and he lit it like a torch and he was holding it up during the show. And my dad starts walking over to this guy and I'm like, oh my God, my dad's going to get into a fight or something. And he went over and said, hey, you got a light? And my dad just lit it. And that was that. That was my kiss, my first show.
That's unbelievable.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Another thing that I'd like to talk to you about that I think you mentioned you'd like to talk about is the Rage Against the Machine radio edit story.
Yeah. It's a funny story because I still need to get some clarity on it myself. It's like one of those things like happened so long ago. It's like, did that actually happen? So, it's true. Basically what happened was when I was working on that show, Metal Shop, the producer of the show, Don Kay, I think had gotten a cassette of Rage Against the Machine when they were just gotten signed. And he gave him the cassette. He goes, I have this band and the song, I really want to play it in the show. I can't. There's like 30 curses in the song. And I said, let me take it. Let me see if I can make an edit of some sort. And I was kind of new at editing, and you were editing on reel-to-reel at the time. But I really liked editing. I really wanted to, it was kind of a challenge. Like, this is a good exercise. Can you do this? So I took the song, and after listening to it, I realized there were parts of the song where Zach Del Roca's cursing, and then there were parts that were exactly the same where he wasn't. So my head was, if I could just keep dubbing the tape, cutting those little pieces, cut the pieces out where Zach's saying, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me, and putting in the part where it's just a guitar part, maybe it'll work. So we did it, and I played it for the producer, and he said, this is great, I'm going to play it in the show. And he did. And from what I heard after that was that the label started using that version to send to radio stations to get the song played, I guess, on radio, because now there was an edited version. And then I think eventually someone made another edited version that got picked up wide. So, maybe I had a hand in getting that song on the radio in the first place. And they're getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year. I have to look, but I'm pretty sure I still have that original edit that I made, which is a reel-to-reel that if you stretched it out, it's just pieces of tape all together to make that final edit. So that was kind of like the first real thing I did in the business where I was like, wow, this is something. Like, I did this and now it's making some impact. And that was cool.
That's unbelievable. I think a band like that deserves to be in the hall.
Oh my God!
And we all individually have in our heads the idea of what that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame means. Mm-hmm. And I know there's a lot of back and forth about who should and shouldn't be in there, but they are definitely a band that should. And if that story is exactly the way you remember it, maybe they'll invite you to the ceremony. Because honestly, that song being played on radio at that time was huge.
Oh yeah.
Enormous. There's no way it would have. We may not be talking about that band at all if that song couldn't be played on the radio.
They were that good. They were going to break no matter what. And if I had a small part in it, or if I triggered someone to make another edit that got them really that notoriety, whatever. But I think what was so unique about them at the time was nobody sounded like that band at that moment. It was almost like they were creating a genre of music that people can try and copy. But it wasn't, everyone was like, there was that whole like 90s, like rap rocky kind of, that's not what they were. They were this totally different, to me, they were more punk rock than anything. It had that punk rock mentality. Yeah. This was a band that was speaking about issues, that was unafraid to address things and do it in a way that was totally unique. The way each of them approached their instruments too was different. This is a band where the guitar player's playing, using his guitar cord to make DJ sounds on his guitar. This is a guy who's, not rapping, but it's more like spoken word, the way he was using his voice. Here's a drummer who, if you go listen to them, what's interesting I find about their drummer Brad is I don't think he ever does a drum fill. It is all beats. It is all power. He just serves the song. And the rhythm section of him and Tim is just unbelievable. So
it's a groove, man.
Oh,
I mean, everything they do has that groove. And, you know, I'm a drummer too, and I had never had that thought that there are really no drum fills.
No fills. I mean,
there's no drum fills. There's no solo breaks. There's no him trying to blow your mind. He's serving the song, just like you said.
And they are a very funky rhythm section. There's a lot of funk in there. They pull on a lot of influences, which I think is great. You know, but it all comes out in this one unique sound. When you hear it, you know that's Rage Against the Machine. There's no question who that is.
Yeah, and there's still nobody that really sounds like them.
No, nope, not at all. And that's hard to pull off.
Thinking about that in that time period, and then talking about the Kiss Unplugged experience, can you believe that that's almost been 30 years?
Yeah, it's crazy.
I remember when I heard that was happening. I think when we talked before, I couldn't afford to go to the conventions, and that's one of my major regrets. But my best bud went and just told me how cool it was. But in my mind, I never kind of even thought about the possibility of the group reuniting around those acoustic performances, and that's really what did it.
Yeah, I mean, I think once Peter came out that one time in LA and sang Hard Luck Woman, I think they saw the reaction. And I also think they were all different people at that time. You know, they became so big, you know, and they toured nonstop, and they were putting out like 2-3 albums a year at one point. You know, that's going to take a toll. And I think it took a toll on all of them differently. And it was just impossible for the four to stay together at that time. But they got to a point where they could do it again for an extent, you know, for a period of time, and they did. And that was great. You know, that first reunion tour was fantastic.
One last Kiss question. I got the Kissology DVDs when they came out. I remember, I'll never forget, I was driving on the north side of Indianapolis one day, and it wasn't in a neighborhood that you would expect to see, but there were posters like at a bus stop, and it was the Kissology 1 promo poster along with other tattered posters on, and that's how I found out that those were coming out. Are they going to be re-released on Blu-ray?
You know, I don't know. I would hope so. It's funny, you know, though I still have some of those posters, those from all of that stuff, because that was a project that we were involved in every single aspect from. Meaning, like, designing the posters, like designing the covers, like, here are the pictures of Kiss we want to use, you know, here's what we wanted each box to be. We really were sat there, and then we would show it to the band, and I still have, like, somewhere, like, Gene crossing this out or circling this, and, like, they were very, you know, hands-on with everything, but they really did trust us because I think they felt we knew what we were trying to accomplish with this thing. So it was a lot of fun, but that was, I mean, you know, we launched the first Kissology with them being they led the Halloween parade in New York on a float and went to the Virgin Megastore and then did a signing that night when, you know, on the first night it was released. And I think it went platinum that week, which was great.
That's insane.
Yeah, it was
well,
cool.
I mean, we don't want to just talk about Kiss, even though I could for hours and hours. What are some of the other influential bands? I mean, going back to hearing that your sister was into disco, and you have an appreciation for disco. I do too. I always did. It's kind of ironic that, you know, it was Kiss and a bunch of disco artists on Casablanca.
Right.
Well, so maybe that was setting you up for that.
Total. Whether it was Donna Summer, Tavares, or, you know, France Jolie, all of that stuff was just great. You know, but going back, it's funny, you know, going back to influential records. You know, everyone, I think when you think of influential stuff, you think of stuff when you're young. But you could get an album tomorrow that's influential to you. If you love music, it'll always be, you know, it could always influence you in some way or another. And, you know, a couple weeks ago, we lost an amazing artist in Sinead O'Connor. And one of my absolute favorite vinyl records is her debut album, Lion and the Cobra, which I think is one of the best debut albums ever. And I've talked about this on Volume, and Alan Light and I have talked about this a lot. It is a fantastic record. It is once again, a record that sounds nothing like anything else. Here was an artist who really knew who she was and what she wanted to do, and was unapologetic about how she did it. And just tremendous record. And one of the also amazing cover, like everything about it. It was it was perfect.
That is a place and a time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think all of us that are around the same age remember when she burst onto the scene.
Right.
We've done a show about first albums, and we didn't talk about that one. Another one, as you were just talking, another one that comes to my head that I think is just as groundbreaking as Tracy Chapman's first record.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It could be argued that Kiss's, first record didn't break that ground, but Alive did.
Right.
I mean, there are other albums in people's oeuvres that were that groundbreaking. But if I think I hope I warned you about this question, but if you were taking 5 records on an island and you had a record player,
right?
What do you think those?
It's like Gilligan's Island.
Yeah. The Harlem Globetrotters will come.
Well, I probably do take Kiss Alive because it is, the best of those first 3 albums. So that's an easy one. Probably Ziggy Stardust, which is one of my.
I saw that behind your Destroyer there.
Yeah, it's there. The other 3 becomes really, and it's the cheap way to say it is you would take like 5 greatest hits records,
right?
You would take Queen's greatest hits. You would take,
I say that greatest hits records count. I mean, I know that there's a back and forth with that, but
because Queen's a hard one, because Queen is one of those bands that there's so many good songs across so many records. There's not one record I think I love so much more over another one. But Sex Pistols' first album, album, and London Calling,
Sounds like you're right in John's wheelhouse over here.
It's gonna really be a mix of rock and punk. That's straight ahead rock and punk rock. I think that's 4. That I said. So let's listen. So Kiss Alive, Ziggy Stardust, London Calling, Sex Pistols, and maybe Pretender's first record.
Oh yeah,
that's the way to do it.
Yeah. Speaking of the Clash, we both love the Clash. John was around when they were. John's a little older, so he was around when they showed up like aliens. Rage kind of reminds me of the Clash,
totally.
Like a new generation of the Clash.
And Tom Morello was a massive Clash, massive. Another band that luckily I got to interview Joe Strummer a bunch of times before he passed, which was just spectacular. To sit and talk to him was unbelievable.
Can you believe I think he's almost been gone for 22 years.
Yeah.
I think it was 2002 when he passed away.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was
such a shock,
Yeah.
And at a time where they were going into the Rock Hall, there was talk of them, getting back together. But I think, as he had put it at the time, was, I don't want to get back together unless we have an album. Like, it wasn't about nostalgia for him. The Clash needed to have a purpose, and a message.
Yeah.
And I think they would have done it.
Yeah. What do you see as the future for music? It's really odd because this writer's strike that's going on kind of makes other questions pop into my head, and music and television and all of these mediums are kind of intertwined in a way that they never have been before. How do you see things going? Because we've mentioned on the show a million times that as we were growing up, bands toured to support albums.
Right.
It's the opposite way now.
Total.
And you having been steeped basically in the music industry for over 30 years, what do you see as the future? Because I hear a lot of these people with the WGA strike talking about being paid so little because of all of the streaming stuff. We've talked to record execs and stuff, and people want to tread lightly in talking about that subject, but it's real and it's true. And I don't think most people understand the complexities and what goes into how bands get paid from all of these music services now.
It's mind-boggling, and I don't know what the solution is, but it's really hard to figure out how bands make a living, outside of being already an established band and being able to make money on the road. Because when you think about it, for it's probably under $15 a month that I could own in my hand every record ever recorded, and listen to them at any time. Whereas prior to that, you had a finite amount of money you could spend on your music, and you could only buy so much, so your choices in what you bought were thought out, and it wasn't like if you bought a record home, you would listen to that record start to finish, backwards, forwards, multiple times. And I think now, because of the access to everything, the attention span's a little shortened, where people will hear a song and like in 20 seconds, I don't like that, and never hear it again, never give it a second chance, or not hear it in context of what it was like in that album format, where, the song before and the song after, it may have had something to do with how you listened to it. So
we've talked about that many times.
Yeah. So I think the vinyl resurgence is actually helping people look at music back the way it was. And I just hope more artists moving forward embrace the format and track albums like albums. Put your songs in an order that has a side 1, side 2 feel, put that ballad at song 3 where it belongs, open up with that big track.
Yeah.
Do that kind of stuff. And I think you might see album sales go back up again. It's weird when you go to concerts now, for me growing up, you collected ticket stubs, I have collections of ticket stubs. That doesn't exist anymore because most tickets are digital. But what I did notice over the last 10 years was I would be at shows and see people buying 45 vinyl, 7-inch vinyls or albums almost as souvenirs. Some of them didn't even have record players. It became like the ticket stub. It was the proof you were at the show, But whatever gets them into it, if it makes them put that record on eventually and listen to it, that's what you want.
I don't think I know the number, but there's a shockingly high number of people who buy vinyl and don't have record players.
Yes.
Yeah. It is like the ticket stub.
Totally. And I think, people don't give enough credit to artists like Taylor Swift, who sell an enormous amount of vinyl and are bringing a generation into the vinyl experience, in a new way. That's real important,
We have talked about that. She is the greatest ambassador, maybe for the music industry in general, but especially for the vinyl community. Yeah.
We've seen kids at record store day with their mom, and these little girls are dressed up like Taylor. They're 13-year-old girls ready to buy her latest RSD vinyl release.
Absolutely. And I think the one thing that's missing from her collection at this point is I don't think Taylor's ever put out a live album, which maybe at this Eras tour, which is such a big tour, and now that she's got that body of music, maybe she will. And it'll probably be the biggest live album of all time if she does.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't do anything that's not the biggest of all time. So
we'll only take a couple more of your minutes, but are there any other artists? You mentioned Heart, Kiss, obviously. Any other artists that you can look back and say, man, they were vital in my adolescence, or vital at a different time in your life?
Easily, yes. Artists like Joe Jackson, massively influential. The Police.
Super underrated, too.
Super underrated, but his albums, to this day, I still think he's putting out great music. He's fantastic live, but hugely influential. Another one who was like Elvis Costello, like mixing, new wave, punk, rock into this new kind of thing that was just so unique, so British at times too, and just so cool. And then of course, the Police were just, mind-boggling when they came out. As a drummer too, it was like, all right, I want to be Stuart Copeland, but all
good
three
luck.
were just incredible. And then you listen to the album, like, that's 3 people doing that. That's crazy. Same thing with Rush. There's so many of these bands that cross. To like narrow down who the influences is hard. Yeah, going back, like I just remember playing Joe Jackson albums over and over again. Joan Jett was another one that I was just blown away by as a kid, and would play that, her first 2 records over and over and over again. And then, there's bands like Living Colour that are just favorites of mine that I think are massively underrated, very influential.
Still killing it right now.
Still killing it. You go see them live now, they will rip your head off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's obvious that the passion is there, and it's always great to see somebody who has managed to be able to navigate their career through an industry that they're not just working in, they're feeling it and they're loving it. And, I really appreciate that, because not everybody gets to do what they love.
No, and I've been very lucky. I have to admit that. And, I'm at a point in my career now where I'm trying to figure out the next phase. And I'm trying to keep that trend of, what do I, do something you love, but do something different. Try something new, but if you can do something where I'm, dealing with artists, dealing with music, that's where I want to be. One other band I have to mention, and it's one of the albums I have back there, and there's some bands that are so close to you, you just forget that they are just part of your DNA. But The Alarm is one of my favorite bands of all time. And another band who I've gotten to get to know over the years and gotten very close with lead singer and his wife and his family. But, a band that was hugely, hugely influential on me. One of the first bands that I started to take notice more so of the lyrical content and point of view, and taught me more about, different part of the country and where they were from and what they were going through. And it was just, every song was like a battle cry, and you wanted to just, get up and, fight for something. It was great. And just still an amazing band.
Yeah, in the early 80s, I got to see The Alarm open for Bob Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
It was a fantastic show.
First time I saw the Alarm in concert was at the Ritz, and Neil Young came out at the end. They did Rockin' the Free World together. It was incredible. Incredible.
It was neat that they were opening for these classic bands.
Just when we were talking about, influences and things, not even influences, but, I'm married now 14 years this year, and my wife's a big fan of music. And,
thank God, right?
Well, she had
thank God. I mean, we just this year alone, this summer we went to go see. I had been aware of the band at the Airborne Toxic event. Great band. She was a huge fan, which made me take a closer look at that band, and made me a huge fan. And I would go see them every time they play. But we could sit around and have those. The other night, there was a beautiful moon out, and it just was like, all right, what are the best songs about the moon? And we just went down that rabbit hole. So it's important that you have this love of music, but also you have someone to share it with.
Absolutely.
So that part of it is fantastic, because I could talk about music all day long, and if I didn't have anyone to talk to it with, I'd be talking to my dog. Then
maybe they understand it more than we do, Roger.
Yeah.
But like I said, I could talk about it all day and all night long. So,
what are some of those other bands that you wanted to mention, though?
Oh, there's just so many newer bands that I'm trying to now they're flying out of my head. But Airborne's not a new band; they're around a long time. Mm-hmm. But singer-songwriters like Jesse Malin, who's just phenomenal, and shout out to Jesse.
I hope he's got it pretty rough right now.
He's, Jesse's dealing with some stuff, but Jesse is a strong human being, and I know he's just he'll do what he needs to do, and he's gonna be great. And I just can't wait to hear more music from him, and he's such a good songwriter and such a great performer and such a great person.
That's shout out to him, and hope he heals up soon. I had one other thing that I kind of wanted to do, just a fast 5 thing, quick 5 questions for you off the top of your head. They may be silly, but we've never done this with an interviewee, so you're our guinea pig.
So you got to go first.
Awesome.
So starting at the top of our fast 5, CD or vinyl?
Vinyl.
Peter, Paul, Gene, erase.
The drummer in me would say Peter. The guitar lover in me would say Ace. The showman in me would say Paul. And just the fan would say Gene.
That's an acceptable cop-out. Books or movies?
I'd say movies. I love to read, but there's movies are an experience. And when done right in the theater, it can be a great experience. Books are fantastic too, but I'd go movies.
Beer or booze? In this life or the past life?
Booze. I never was a big beer guy. Just get you bloaty and tired and heavy. I'd rather a nice tequila and a cigar, and I'm happy.
And finally, in today's world, texts or phone calls?
Phone calls. I think so much is lost in texting.
Yes.
There's so much inflection and tone, and text can be just taken the wrong way, and they're just so, I don't know. It's
impersonal.
Impersonal, and just pick up the phone. Like, it's so hard to do now.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much.
We have been trained for that impersonal stuff. It's like communication is a transaction when it's just text.
Right. But I will say, I think if you're going to have a conversation, phone always. But
yes.
What time am I meeting you? 6 p.m.? Text works great there. You don't need to have a conversation on one-word answers,
Or I didn't get the invite for the meeting yet.
Right. Exactly. I didn't need to call you and be like, hey, are we doing this? What's going on? So, phone calls. Phone calls are just, we grew up on them. We grew up
Absolutely.
I grew up with a rotary phone that,
yes.
You hopefully had a long enough cord so you could go in the bathroom to have a private conversation, and it's like going across your kitchen table while people were eating,
I recently was talking to somebody about those rotary phones and those long phone cables, and I realized that that's where my OCD, or as I call it, CDO, because that's alphabetical.
Right.
That's where it began, because anytime as a kid I saw one of those phone cords that was tangled, I had to untangle it.
Oh, yeah. You would just, and because it would twist like this. And
Yeah.
You would do it while you were on the phone, so it gave you something to do. It was like, all right.
Yeah. You're like,
try and get this straight again. And the second you let go, it just went back.
Yep. Twist back up. We do shows on specific albums. We've done 2 of them. The first one we did was Dark Side of the Moon.
Okay.
But the second, and we call them deep disc dives. The second we did was on Ziggy. And when I suggest shows to the true music fans and geeks, those are the 2 that I point out.
You could do 10 shows on Ziggy, I think. It is just the story behind the making of the album, the actual songs on that record, the band behind that thing. It's incredible. It really is. I'm a ridiculous Bowie fan, and that is just an amazing, amazing record.
Yeah, I would suggest, if you've got the time, take a listen to that show, because it's my best friend, my musical sensei growing up, is the guy that does those shows with us, and he's the one that dives into those rabbit holes and does all the research. And I'm not kidding, that when we did Dark Side of the Moon, he walked in with a stack of 20 pages of research, and John was like taken aback.
We've got research now.
Yeah, you could probably do a podcast series on Dark Side of the Moon. That record. Just the interpretations of the music and the stories behind the making of all of that, and who's singing on this song, and is it real? All of that stuff.
Basically, bringing the liner notes to a podcast or a show. I think that I'd love to do a show that's a deep disc dive on a different record every time. Obviously that would be very time consuming, and it would require a lot of help, but that's I've thought about doing that for a long time, but this is enough to handle right now.
In your Dark Side episode, did you guys go into the whole Wizard of Oz thing?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
That happened in Indiana.
Yeah, it was
Kokomo?
Kokomo, I think. It was published in a Kokomo paper.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you actually go and do it and see if it matched up? And did you try it?
I did in college when I first heard of it.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It tangentially matches up, but also that depends on the amount of chemicals and type of chemicals that you might be experimenting with.
I also think if you take a record long enough, an album long enough, and you put them on side by side, there's going to be some coincidences that just happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And which is the beauty of that idea. I mean, I love that idea, but yeah, we went into a lot of rabbit holes with Dark Side. And the reason that was the first one that we did that deep disc dive show with is because as record collectors, whether it's us on the podcast or going to shows or record stores, it seems like that album comes up every time.
Yeah.
So I have one question for you guys, though, for each of you. As record collectors and guys who are going to these record stores, do each of you have like one record that you are seeking out constantly, like that white whale?
We call it the White Whale.
Mm-hmm.
And Wheels, you want to take that?
Ooh, what is my white whale? Oh, the Cake box set. So Cake, the band, they released all their albums as a RSD box set, and it's gone through. It's like
what, 7 years ago?
Yeah,
7 or 8 years ago. Yeah.
But the prices are now like $1,600 to start.
Wow.
Yeah. Mine would be a Robert Ludwig Led Zeppelin 2. I mean, it's almost cliche, but I love that record so much. Our last show was actually ranking Led Zeppelin's albums, and that was a tall order. But I've made the comment before. I have a list of stuff to look for when I go to shows or record stores. But there's something about walking in to the record store or the show that throws all that out the window.
Right.
And I think it is that muscle memory. I think it is that time travel level of it, because there's a smell and there's a feel and the tactile and being somebody that likes order and not chaos. I love alphabetization. That clicks a box for me. So if I walk up to a dealer and his stuff is a mess, I'm not spending any time there.
Wow. So as a collector, what makes a rare album more valuable than another? Is it misprints, like things on the actual covers, or is it just the lack of copies out there?
There are people that are really into this who are steeped in value and how much something is worth. And I don't think either of us, that's not a concern for either of us. There are certain albums that I love first prints of. Like if I could get that Led Zeppelin 2, that would be unbelievable. But those new represses, or we call them repops, of the Led Zeppelin repops that came out in 2014, you can't beat those.
Right. They sound so good. They sound better than CDs.
Yeah.
I mean, they just sound beautiful.
I'm not a collector snob in the sense that I only want first pressings or specific pressings. There are bands out there that, there was a first press, even in the vinyl era, and there hasn't been a reissue. So you mentioned CMT. Are you a country fan at all too? Yeah.
I said I've recently become a country fan. I'd say because, through the volume stage of my career, but people like Miranda Lambert and Little Big Town, and also a lot of the outlaw country stuff.
I have just recently discovered a band called Midland out of Texas.
I'm going to write that down.
3 guys, and it is outlaw country to the nth. Their first album came out in 2016, and funny enough, I just ordered that record from a guy in the Netherlands because it's not available.
Oh, wow.
Here in the U.S. Their first song was called Drinking Problem, but they also have a song called Burnout that the video for it is one continuous shot through like an old, like Gillies, like a honky tonk. It's fantastic. And I grew up, I was about 7 when all that outlaw country stuff really started to pop. And these guys, they click that switch.
I got a 2-hour car ride after this. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, check them out, because there haven't been a lot of new country bands that I've like latched onto, and for about the last month, I've been pretty exclusively listening to them. So
you know, one thing I wanted to mention too, and get your take on this. I totally forgot about this, but when I was at MTV, you know, we would get product sent. So I was on a bunch of vinyl reissue lists, and there was, you know, we were talking about Queen before. There was this Queen show live at the Rainbow in like '78, I think it was, or '77. I forget what year. But they sent me the vinyl, and it was a gatefold 2 vinyl, you know, albums. And I was like, wow, this is great. So I put it on at home, check it out, and I listened to the whole first side, and it's Queen live. I flip it over, and it's got the label, you know, side 2, blah, blah, blah. I put it on, and it's Royal Blood's first album, side 1. And then the rest of the second album it was just that one side of the one album was a different band, totally, labeled with Queen. It was the weirdest misprint I've ever gotten.
I've just a couple weeks ago, I heard of one of Taylor Swift's records, the C side because she's redoing her studio output. Version,
yeah.
And I can't remember who the band was on mistakenly printed, but I think they said that it was less than 100 copies. So I love anomalies like that,
right? For
sure. And speaking of Heart, you know that the '86 album, there's a misprint version of that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I can't remember who the guy. As you look at it, the guy on the left side that's standing, there's like a round thing. I don't know if it was like a graphic that they were going to put includes the hits,
right,
and actually print it as opposed to hype sticker. But I just discovered that in North Carolina like 2 weeks ago when I was at a record show with my buddy that lives down there. Just real quickly, what do you think about that record? Because I know the band has a love-hate relationship with it.
I mean, there's some great power ballady, big sounding songs on it, and you know, vocally they both sound great on the record. I think it's a fine record for their career. It's a phase in their career that they might be less happy with because their songs were getting rejected. They were being given songs to record for the first time ever, you know. But you know, it's got to be tough for an artist like that when your biggest record is not the one that you love or the one you have an issue with. And that happens a lot because, you know, timing is everything. And sometimes, you know, a producer is very keyed into the trends at the moment and knows what might be great for that band at that time, but might not be looked at so great over the course of a career, you know. But I listen to those songs. You know, it's not the original lineup, and, you know, it has a different sound, and it's more, you know, electronic, and especially in the drums and stuff like that, and more processed and bigger sounding, but that's okay.
Yeah. That's one of the misprints that I've heard of. Do you have any?
I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know Michael Young would know about value of misprints.
We had a guest on, and he's become a friend. He was a local DJ back in the 90s at the X station here in ND, and he's one of those encyclopedic dudes that knows run out numbers and, you know, all of that stuff. He would really be into that. I mean, when I find out about those misprints or that stuff, I mean, there is a part of me that goes, oh, I got to have that. But, you know, at the same time, you have to temper that with, it's expensive enough buying just a regular record hot off the press, let alone something with that kind of rarity. So the completist in me would love to have all of those wacky things, but the pragmatist is like, well, the wallet will suffer.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something, guys. It would be a treat one day if I'm ever in your neck of the woods or you're ever in mine to hang out and go to a record store together.
Oh, yeah. That would be the best.
We would love to do that. Where do you live in? You live in New York, right?
Yeah, primarily in New York.
Okay.
There's still a bunch of cool record stores you could find.
Yeah. I found a really cool one at the Ed Sullivan Theater building. when I was there last fall with my wife. My wife and I try to make it there once a year.
Right.
And I actually discovered it right before COVID, and I was glad to see that post COVID it's survived.
Still there. That's great.
It's downstairs on the side of the building. I can't remember the name of it. I wish I could, but they've got a great selection of used and new, and really their prices aren't that bad. I also went to a flea market in Brooklyn when I was there and found a treasure trove of first print 80s records like Queensryche, Rage for Order, Operation Mindcrime, Faster Pussycat. I mean, it was a woman who had mainly R&B,
right?
But she had a couple of boxes that nobody had picked through, and I, thank God my wife lets me do this.
Yes,
that's the real blessing.
Absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
Roger, thank you so much. We're probably going to start editing this today or tomorrow.
Okay.
I'll send you a link before we do, just if a Dropbox link would work, just so you can kind of scrub through and check it out. I don't think there's anything controversial that we covered.
No, I just hope I didn't ramble too much, and I hope
you did the perfect amount of talking, because when we have somebody like you on, the last thing we need to hear is him or I. So, but thank you so much, and me and my fanatic Kiss buddies are still kind of thinking about the December show. So if we change our minds or if we make any solid plans, I'll definitely let you know, because it'd be awfully cool to at least see you.
Absolutely.
If we come out there for that.
And if you ever decide to do an all Kiss episode, please give me a call.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we just did the Led Zeppelin ranking. And the way we've thought about it is we want to do, we want to do the Beatles, we want to do the Stones, but it would have to be a top 10.
Right.
Just because there's so many to cull from.
Yep.
I mean, unless we did a two-parter, and I'm not sure how many people would tune in for a two-part top Kiss record.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. But we will definitely refer back to that. And if you have any questions or anything before you get a link from me, just let me know. And I really can't thank you enough.
No, I can't thank you guys for even wanting me on the show, giving me a chance to babble and talk about this kind of stuff. I don't have a channel to do this every day on right now.
Yeah.
I know, but it's like I said, I would hear you. Obviously, the Kiss thing really clicked with me, but every time you would jump in on the show, which it wasn't that often. I mean, I'm sure there were plenty of times you wanted to and you didn't.
I tried to stay. Sometimes I wouldn't even go in the studio because I knew I'd get on, and I didn't want to. It was their show.
And there were also times when it was something that Eddie knew that you would be able to chime in about, or that you'd love to, that he got a hold of you to chime in about.
Well, anytime Eddie talked about Kiss, he knew myself and John Five were calling in.
Yeah.
That just became a thing that, and it wasn't like I was texting John Five or he was like, we would just always call in together. And it was kind of funny. But yeah, I mean, listen, I can't thank you guys enough.
Thanks so much, man. It has been a blast. I mean, I could talk to you forever.
Dude,
it's been a blast.
Like I said, let's stay in touch. Anytime you want to just shoot the shit, I'm around.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. And thanks for displaying Destroyer.
Wow. What a great conversation. Roger is a prince to spend his time with us for really a couple of hours on just a random Monday.
Yeah, I mean, it's encouraging to talk to someone that's a leader in the music industry the way he is. But you spend 5 seconds talking to him, you can tell that the passion is there. And that is encouraging to me. So, Roger, thanks for being with us, and we can't tell you how much fun we had talking to you. You guys, on the other hand, I want to let you know that we need you to subscribe to our YouTube page. We need you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, all of the socials. We'd love you to download the show anywhere that you listen to podcasts, but you can also listen to podcasts on the YouTube Music app now. That's just wanted to put that in your ears. We can't thank all of you enough for the support. We can't thank Roger enough for the time with us. For Wheels, I'm Jay, and we'll see you all the next time around.